Hello, everybody. Happy Wine Wednesday. Welcome to the Oregon versus Burgundy Pinot Noir face-off. Super excited to be tasting all these wines side by side. This has been a requested class, like a very often requested class in terms of just Pinot Noir, different regions, different styles. And so I just, instead of doing 4 different regions of Pinot Noir and 4 very different styles, I've decided to do 2 wines from Oregon and 2 wines from Burgundy. I wasn't going to do a class in November, but I tasted all 4 of these wines trying to find the Pinot Noir that I was going to feature for Thanksgiving. And tasting all these wines side by side, I realized everyone else needed to have the exact same experience that I did side by side. So very excited to share these wines with you. If you're tuned in, make sure that you are signed in to the whatever YouTube email account that you have so you can participate in the chat room. I'd love to hear where you are coming from and who you are. Denise and Kevin Malecki, great to see y'all. Rob and Kira, great to see y'all as well. Where are y'all tuning in from? Aiden, Allen, great to see you. Tawana, fabulous, great to see you. Marion, Chris, Bonzek, awesome. Ryan, great to see you. Or maybe one day we'll actually meet in real life. Sam Pop here. Sam Mom is going to be a little delayed. And no, it's not because she's still delivering wine. Everyone get their wine on time, I promise. Amanda Staples, hey, how are you? Mary and Nate, ready to go? I'm ready to go too. I'm thirsty. Gail and Bob, fabulous to see y'all. Bonsoir as well, Rick. Brian, Dorothy, and Tess here. Awesome. Krista, Renzi, Wendy, Bonnie, and Charlie. So I'm just going to call them Chris Nelson and the gang for that group over there. Great to see everybody. I'm so excited about these Pinot Noirs. Just as a way of setting up while we're waiting for everyone else to tune in, I think some people are still getting ready to go. If you have 4 wine glasses, I highly recommend trying all 4 of these wines side by side. We will do it in 2 rounds of 2 side by side and then the next 2 side by side. But being able to then go back and switch up the order and try different wines side by side will be really fun. So the first round, we're going to do Brandebourg. This is their Pinot Noir 2014 vintage. This is the Bradley Vineyard Pinot Noir from Elkton, Oregon. That's going to be on the very far left, glass on the left. The second wine for the second round is going to be Domaine de la Veche, Bourgogne Rouge from Côte Chalonnaise, the 2018 vintage. So those 2 wines are going to be side by side for the first round. If you're going ahead and pouring all 4 wines to try side by side, then that's awesome. Your third glass, and I always do left to right because we read left to right, at least in English. So I like to taste left to right just to keep that flow. So it's easier to keep my glasses not mixed up, especially when you're doing 4 wines that are so similar in color and style. So your third glass, we're going back to Oregon. And this is the Lundin Articulate Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley, 2016. And finally, the very last wine that we will taste, second wine for the second round, or just the 4th glass, is Domaine Pillon by Laurent and Roman. This is their Mercure from Burgundy, and it's their 2017 vintage. So awesome. Tuning in from California. That's fabulous. I'm sorry I didn't feature any California Pinot Noirs for this particular class. There's so many amazing wines out there, and I just have to keep doing more classes to feature all of the wines that I want to. So if you are not tasting all 4 of these wines tonight, totally fine. You can just pick 1. You can just pick 2. You can pick 3, whatever works for you. The recording is up on YouTube, so you can tune in and watch the recording later at your own time. And if you need further reference, so you never have to open up all 4 wines at the same time. So yes, we're going to go ahead and do that. I recommend going ahead and pouring all 4 of your wines if you've got 4, or just the first 2 if you're doing the first round with us. If you're only picking 2 wines, I honestly maybe recommend the first 2 wines that we're going to do. The next 2 wines are amazing. I think that they probably need a little bit more air, a little bit more breathing time. So pick either one you want if you haven't already opened the wine. Yes, and Bob Scanlon, thanks so much for saying that. Yes, the Coravin. Again, I don't make money by selling Coravins, but I think everyone should buy one because I will sell more wine because everyone will want to participate in more classes if you can open up 4 wines without actually opening the bottle. I'm about to post a video tomorrow about the Coravin, how to best use it, how to best take care of it. So holidays are coming up, put it on your wish list or buy it for yourself for just making it through 2020. And highly, highly, highly recommend Coravin. So awesome. And so Amanda, I'll put the Coravin video up on YouTube and I'll email it out to everybody, but it's basically this contraption that sticks a needle through the cork. The needle is hollow, so it allows wine to come out through that needle. It replaces the space left with argon gas. Argon gas is the same atmospheric pressure unit as oxygen, so it's not going to make the bottle explode, which is really great. Keeps the pressure inside the bottle the same as outside the bottle, but argon gas won't affect the flavor of wine like oxygen does. So basically, you can access the wine without technically opening it, and your bottles stay good for months and months. They say online that, they advertise that your wines are good for years. I have not found that to be the case, but definitely for like 6 months, no problem or issues whatsoever. So highly recommend, check out Coravin, yeah, get yourself a Coravin. They're like on sale on Amazon right now for like under $150. So pretty good deal. All right, well, let's get into Pinot Noir. If you are not tasting these wines alongside of us, I'm just curious what wine you're opening. So those of you who are tuning in from Maryland or California, anywhere else, please let me know what wines you are drinking with us so I can virtually or visualize what's in your glass as we talk through these wines. So let's get into it now. We are going to do these wines side by side. So if you have these tasting sheets, I recommend using them because it's just going to help you kind of focus your brain on the splitting of the hairs of the differences, the minute differences between these wines. So up at the top says red wine number 1, red wine number 2. Your second sheet will say 3 and 4. So use them as you like. If you have these as well, the basics of tasting, Wine 101. I will put these up on my website eventually so everyone can download. I just need to get them copyrighted. And a wine aroma chart just to help figure out the vocabulary of naming what you are smelling. So awesome. All right, so we got some California Cabernet Sauvignon being tasted over in California. So we will definitely do a Cabernet class soon, probably in December or January, because it's going to be cold and the wines will be delicious then. So, all right, move on my papers. There's so many papers here. Let's go ahead and start. We're going to start with the Brandebourg Pinot Noir on the left and the Domaine de l'Evêche Pinot Noir on the right. So each of these rounds, we're going to do Oregon first. Let's go ahead and just taste through it, and then we're going to do France first, taste through it. Figure out the differences. This will be less nerdy as the soil series classes. We're going to have way less of the chemistry, way less of the in-depth lecture on how these wines were chemically made in the vineyards, and a little bit more discussion on how these wines taste. So way more of an analytical class. Rather than lecture style class. So Ryan's drinking Tehran, so Croatian grape from Mysteria, fabulous. Celebrating St. Martin Day, wonderful. I love celebrating any holiday that allows us to drink wine with the excuse of celebrating a holiday. So, all right, 2 glasses. Let's, first of all, we're gonna start by looking at the color of each of these wines. So sight is really important. When you're analyzing wines, some people jump into tasting or maybe smelling first, but the sight is going to be really important, especially with Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir runs the gamut of super, super pale, like the Brandebourg over here, to really, really dense based on the style that the winemaker is trying to explore with the grapes. So if you hold up both of these glasses, give them some swirls. I'm learning how to swirl with my left hand, but it's still awkward. What I'm looking for is if you swirl the wine with a light source in the background, you're looking for the clarity of the wine. So how clearly the light is reflected through the wine Both of these wines are very, very like brilliantly clear. They're not foggy, cloudy, or hazy. There's no apparent sediment in the wine. So definitely very, very clear. Now color, you don't actually want to hold up to find color because both of them are going to be pretty similar and they're going to pick up color from around the room. So you actually want to hold the wine glasses on the side, almost like parallel to horizontal surface. That would just be horizontal, but you know what I mean. And you're gonna look straight down. I like using a white background that has words on it so I can see how easily I can read through the wine. And these wines are both very, very pale in concentration, right? You can read through them easily. The color is quite different though. Definitely getting a lot more of the garnet coloring on the wine from Oregon, the Brandebourg. And garnet in wine world is that brickish hue, that tawny coloring, a little bit of like amber notes, a little more brown tinged coloring rather than ruby red or purple. So the wine on the right, so wine number 2 from Burgundy, France, it has more of those purpley notes, right, too. There's like these blue undertones of the wine. Definitely like ruby with some blue and purple undertones, I would say. Both are very similar in terms of concentration and clarity, though. Quite different on the nose. So pale garnet on wine number 1. Absolutely, yes. Loving the beautiful ruby on wine number 2. For sure, both of these gorgeous, gorgeous colors. Love Pinot Noir coloring. They're just gorgeous. All right, so concentration, pale on both of these. Maybe slightly more concentrated on the Burgundian Pinot Noir. The legs are going to tell us alcohol percentage. So if you give both of the wines some good swirls, you're going to let the wine settle inside the glass. I love swirling in these big Pinot Noir glasses too. Remind me to talk about glassware once we get further into the class and why Pinot Noir glasses are so different than other red wine glasses. But you're looking for those legs, those teardrops of wine that after you swirl the wine, kind of coats the inside of the glass, the extra wine forms these teardrops or drips or legs and fall down the inside of the glass. It's easiest to see those legs, concentrate and focus on them if you look at this part of the glass rather than the part closer to you. And the faster they are to form and fall, the less they're defined, the flabbier those legs are, then the lower the alcohol content. And the thicker they are, the slower they are to form and fall, the more defined they are, would be an indication of higher alcohol content. Now, if your wines have sugar in them, if there's any sweetness at all in the wine, any residual sugar content will increase the definition and the slowness of those legs. All of these wines are bone dry though, so they're really going to be more indicative of alcohol content for all of these. Let's see if we see a difference between the two. If y'all have already done this, I just polished these glasses, so it's going to take a little bit more time for these legs to form and fall. But I'm seeing pretty similar, maybe slightly slower legs on the Burgundian Pinot Noir. Tell me if y'all are getting anything too terribly different from that. But with these wines, remember that we're going to have very, very minute differences between all of them because they're all Pinot Noir. They're all made in a very similar way, just from different regions and slightly different styles. So don't be too upset if you aren't seeing these drastic differences between those. If there were drastic differences, this face-off wouldn't be quite as fun. All right, let's get into the nose. This is my favorite part about Pinot Noir because Pinot Noir can be a very aromatic grape. It can be super subtle and it can be pretty intense on the nose and everywhere in between. So let's get our noses in both of these. I like to go back and forth whenever I have two wines side by side to really get the different levels of expression. So Chris says, number 1, the legs are thinner and slower than number 2. Okay, so it's slightly different than me. Amanda Staples says number 2, definitely slower. So got a little bit differences on those. Let's see, just so we know, the bottles are labeled, I believe it's the exact same alcohol percentage. Oh, no, it is not. Wow, okay. Never mind. We'll talk about alcohol percentage in just a second, but quite a bit different on these. So All right, so first I like to decide which wine has a more expressive nose. Which wine of these is more intense? And then as y'all are smelling the wine, please make your notes in the chat room what you're smelling. And just list wine number 1 or wine number 2. You don't have to make all of the, you don't have to type out the whole title of the wines. But if you just list the wine number 1 or wine number 2 and then say what you're smelling in the wine, that would help us figure out which one is which. And go ahead and just anything that you are smelling. Remember, naming that smell is like learning a new language, right? Smelling something and then figuring out what it is you're smelling instead of just, I smell red wine. That's really important to practice. It's a skill that you learn and you get better at by practicing. So don't be discouraged if you're not getting all of these crazy tasting notes. Trust your palate, trust your nose, and be brave and say the first thing that's actually coming to your mind. But don't be concerned if you're smelling something different than other people are. We all have different levels of sensitivity on our nose. So practice makes perfect, and it's a really fun thing to practice. So, all right, let's see. Rick, I'm sorry y'all lost picture and sound. Williamsburg, I find often my friends in Williamsburg are struggling to get all of the live video feed as easily. So I apologize about that. Hopefully it is back on. Wine number 1, getting some cooked cherries. Not sweet, like in a pie though, Tawana says. A touch of allspice maybe. Okay, great. I love that. Touch of earthiness with some some tobacco on the nose. Yes. And then Brian says wet sidewalk on number 2. So a little bit more of that minerality. If you tuned in for any of the soil series classes where we talked all about minerality and why we smell or taste minerality in wine. Love it. So good. Glad you're back in, Rick. Number 1, cherries, wood, spice, maybe vanilla. So great. Definitely chiming in along with Tawana's tasting notes similarly. Wine number 2, tart chanberries. Cranberries and cherries put together is chanberries. I like that. Tart chanberries with red vines. I love it. Chris and the gang says wine number 1, sour and dried cranberry. Great. A little bit of black pepper. Wonderful. Amanda Staples says number 2 is really ripe raspberries or cranberries. So a little bit darker fruit, a little bit riper fruit rather than the brightness and the red qualities of the Oregon Pinot Noir. Denise says number 1 has some nail polish remover. So if you're getting that, that's called volatile acidity or VA, it's shortened to in the wine world. And often that can just blow off if you just opened up your wine recently. They didn't get enough air. You have what's called volatile acidity. It's just how the alcohols, those chemical compounds are evaporating into your glass and into your nose. So give the wine some really good swirls. Blow a puff of air into the glass to kind of push out those alcohol molecules that have evaporated, but they're kind of sticking around, that are going to give you those smells of nail polish remover. So big swirls, and then if you do it too much, then just like I did, I think I did this the last class, I blew too hard and the wine splashed back in my face. So don't do that. But a little bit of air into the glass will hopefully allow that VA, volatile acidity, to blow off. So number 1, some wet soil. So minerality also, but a little bit more of that dank, dark, wet earth rather than the rocky minerality of Burgundy, the wet sidewalk. I'm loving all of these tasting notes, y'all. Steve Hill, Sampop says, number 2, maybe a little bit of wet mulch on a sidewalk. Okay, so that combination of that earthiness, that woodsiness, especially like bark. That's what mulch is, right? All this bark on the sidewalk. So all that different earthiness with the minerality. Everyone say hello to Salmon. Hello. How is it nice? I bet it's really nice to walk home and just have 4 glasses of wine waiting for you. And everybody, it is Sam Mom and Sam Pop's 42nd anniversary tonight, and they are still graciously allowing me to come over and do the wine class here. So happy anniversary to Sam Mom and Sam Pop. 42 years young in their marriage. They got married when they were 5. So my mom is, it was just 47. So, all right. So back to the wine. Slightly sour with some Brett. So that Retanomyces, if you're on your wine aroma chart, all the way over here, biological. Very on the bottom of the animal category, you have Retanomyces. That is the name of the fungus. It's this fungus that grows in the rafters of wine cellars. So it's 1 and that's 2. They grow in the rafters of the wine cellars. There's thousands and thousands of strains. They don't get added to the wine at all. Don't think like fungus is growing in the wine. But the wine that's being aged in barrels that have this fungus kind of around are basically going to absorb some of the aromatics. So your wine won't taste like these things, but it will often smell like those things. A little bit of barnyard, a little bit of manure can be really offensive if it's not in check at all and it's a little bit more overgrown, or it can be really nice in terms of just adding a different layer of complexity to the wine. So definitely it was more native to France and very popular in France just because their cellars were so dirty. It's less and less common now as people are just keeping pristinely clean environments. But it's a stylistic thing. So some people like that addition, that flavor component of Retanomyces. But if you ever see the word Brett, B-R-E-T-T, like the man's name, then that is usually, if in a wine descriptor, that's usually a shortened abbreviation of Retanomyces. All right, so number 1, a little bit more intense on the nose. Fully agree with that. Way more like vibrant and expressive on the nose on number 1. Wine number 2, a little bit of blackberry and some funk. All right, great. So we're going for that Retanomyces. I'm so curious to see what you think about this, Chris Nelson, because I know you've been on the journey of hating Retanomyces in wine to now appreciating it and liking it. So I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. So Ryan says, time to drink some. And everyone's saying happy anniversary as well. So Tawana says, why did I wave like she could see me? I love that. I love that. These virtual classes, reality is just kind of skewed in this one. So, and they did not have an arranged marriage. All right. So Mary and Chris says both are dried fruit and jammy. So we've got some dried fruit, some jammy notes in it too. And broke down and took a swig. I love it. Yes, these classes, I won't make everyone wait to taste. Taste at your own time. I know we talk a lot of go in different tangents, but taste at your own pace. All right. Let's get into the taste of these, and after we get into the taste of these, while y'all continue to explore the flavor profiles of these wines, I'll talk about what these wines are in your glass and where they come from, winemakers, traditions, how they're made, etc. So when I have 2 wines side by side, I like to do just a quick first impressions taste of each one, and then I go back and do more in-depth, the slurp, the swirl, the swish, the chug, all of that stuff. The chug wasn't really a professional part on the tasting sheet, but sometimes it's necessary. Let's see. First impressions, whoo, that's tart, super vibrant, very expressive. First impression is very similar in taste to the smell of the wine, just bright, zesty, cranberry, cherry, all this red fruited herbaceousness. Bright though. Yes, dry, very dry, right? There's no sweetness in this wine. Let's see about the wine from Burgundy, first impression. Quite different. Very, very dry. Less of the brightness and the zesty red fruit. Definitely more of the darker fruit. And yeah, it's got some funk on it and a little bit like this iron, right? There's a little bit of like this meaty component to it. Quite different. Both very similar just in terms of how they sit on the palate, their body, and the finish, but very, very different in flavor profile. It's quite interesting. All right, let's take bigger sips now. Go ahead and swish, swirl, slurp in some air while the wine is in your mouth to kind of let that wine breathe and open up while it's in your mouth. Whoa. It's almost medicinal. It's so much cherry, but not like in a bad way, but very much that candied cherry flavor profile, almost like it's fake cherry, like cherry flavored something. Abundant cherry. I mean, overflowing cherry. Tell me what else you are tasting in wine number 1. And I'm actually going to do a cracker in between wine number 1 and wine number 2 just to kind of reset the palate a little bit, because these wines are, I feel like, going to be a little intense because the acids are so high. Even though they're lighter bodied, they are not shy in the structure of the wine. So some questions here. Burgundy is sweeter while still dry. So let's talk about vocabulary of that then. I think the Burgundy is fruitier in terms of like darker, richer, rounder fruit, more ripe fruit, versus the red, bright, under-ripe, tart fruit of the Oregon Pinot Noir. Both are bone dry, right? Both have zero sweetness to it, but the fruit, the fruitier flavors of the Burgundy is a little bit that richer, rounder style. So I think if I translated what you were saying correctly, Amanda, tell me if that fits what you were trying to say. Joanna says, wow, very similar, but in a very different at the same time on the palate. Wine number 1, very soft, fresh, tart fruit. Wine number 2 being zingy cooked fruit. Yes, so that tart fruit versus cooked fruit. A little bit of that bright red versus deeper, darker, rounder fruit. So agree, Amanda. Chris says about the fruitiness and sweetness and dryness. Denise says tart, dry cranberry on number 1. Awesome. Number 2, wine seems more complex than wine number 1. Okay. I would probably agree with you on that one for sure. Amanda, does that difference come from the age of the vines? Interesting question. So when I'll talk about after we go through and taste a little bit more of these wines, I'm going to talk about what makes these 2 regions so different and what makes them so similar at the same time. But no, the age of the vines isn't necessarily giving these difference of flavor. So we're going to talk, if you just put a pin on that, we're going to talk about why these wines taste different in just a second. So, okay, good. Glad I translated. Okay. Sometimes without actually being able to hear people's voices and just reading the chat room, it's hard to be able to translate what everyone is saying about the wines. But hopefully got it down. So I'm going to do one more taste, but now I'm going to try the Burgundy first, and then I'm going to go back and try the Oregon Pinot Noir just to see how the progression might change my expression or my interpretation of these wines in the glass. So back to the Burgundy. Wow. Really different now that I took that time and tasted the Burgundy again. I'm getting more of that cherry note that I didn't get the first time around. A little bit more fruit, but it's definitely darker cherry, right? It's more like black cherry, rainier cherries than the red cherries. Let's go back to the Brandebourg now and see how it changes. Got some kids' toys going off in the background. Yeah, totally different on the second time around with the Brandebourg. It doesn't seem as acidic. It doesn't seem like my eyes aren't watering quite as much. Softened up a little bit. So I appreciate that because it was pretty intense right off the bat. All right. As y'all continue to taste these, please put your tasting notes up in the chat room. And I'm going to talk about these wines and why they are so different. Let's see here. All right. reset it here, turn off my phone. This Brandebourg, let's talk about this real quick. So this Brandebourg is not from Willamette Valley, Oregon. So remember, it's Willamette, damn it. That's how it's pronounced, not Willamette. So Willamette, that's where most of the Oregon Pinot Noir is coming out of. That is in the north of Oregon. In the south of Oregon, underneath Willamette, closer to California border, you actually have all of the regions just called Southern Oregon AVA, American Viticultural Area. It's just the geographic boundaries of what the government has decided this is the wine region, and the vineyards within that geographic region can be labeled as such, as Willamette or as Elkton or as Southern Oregon or whatever that may be. It doesn't imply specific grapes that can or cannot be grown there or winemaking practices or styles or anything like that. It's just geographic boundaries. Versus in Oregon, if you're going to put the region, Côte Chalonnaise, the region on your label, not only does the wine have to geographically come from that area, but it also has to be those approved grapes, whatever that region approves, made in that style. Actually, some of these wine regions will mandate that those wines that are going to label their wines with that region, that appellation, are going to have to submit their wines to a taste test panel where these professionals come in and make sure that their wines taste like they should taste if they're coming from that area. So you don't have the same thing in the United States. We're more laissez-faire, don't tell me how to make wine or what I can and cannot do, which increases innovation in the new world, as we call it. But you definitely have a little bit more variability in terms of wine styles, for sure. So Elkton is a region in the Umpqua Valley of Southern Oregon. So you have Oregon, Willamette Valley, Southern Oregon. Within Southern Oregon, you have the Umpqua Valley. And then within that, you have Elkton. So typically speaking, Willamette has the better climate for Pinot Noir because it's cooler. Pinot Noir is what's considered a cool climate grape. It thrives best and tastes best, makes the best wine in cooler climates. If you have warmer climates, you generally get elevated alcohol content, not the complexities and layers of flavor that you really want in Pinot Noir. Because it's a subtle grape, you need a little bit of cooler climate to allow those subtleties to come together, be braided together in complexity rather than just over-the-top power. So within Southern Oregon, generally a little bit warmer, so you have more white wine grape varieties growing there, some other things growing in, but within that, Umpqua Valley, higher elevation. And as we know, higher elevation, it means cooler climate. So the further up you go from sea level, the cooler climate that you have. And so we have some of the highest elevation vineyards in Elkton, which is why it has a different geographical AVA. There's a different appellation for it because the climate is so different here. So Elkton was established as an AVA, or an American Viticultural Area, in 2013. So this is pretty new in terms of wine regions. And I really love Brandebourg. They've been around, I think, for about 20 years, husband and wife team, and have just really focused on this region. So they were like, yes, Willamette has some great wines, but this area of Elkton actually makes really, really spectacular wines. So cooler climate, higher elevation. And what that does, higher elevation not only makes a cooler climate, but it's also going to elongate the growing season. So rather than having a shorter growing season where at the very beginning of the season, when the grapes develop all of their tannins and acids and stuff like that, as soon as it turns to a certain heat temperature, then the grapes stop developing tannins and acids and start developing sugar in the grapes. Well, all of that, if that happens just within, a 2-month time versus a 3-month time, you get powerful wines sometimes, but without complexity. So the longer the growing season is able to be in a healthy way, the more complex and layered your wines can be. So long growing season is better. So higher elevation, cooler climate is going to elongate that growing season because it's cooler in general, and because it has what's called higher diurnal temperature variations. So those swings of warmer days and cooler nights. This is very cool. So even in Willamette Valley in July and August, you can easily get up to the 90s in terms of how hot it gets during the day. In this area of Elkton, max 85 degrees during the day, even in July and August. So you have cooler climate across the board and these bigger shifts, so much cooler nights. So you actually have a longer growing season in Elkton than you do in plenty of areas in Willamette Valley. So single vineyard, so really expressing like the best of their vineyard spaces. They started with just about 5 acres. Now they're up to about 50 acres. And let's now hop over to Burgundy, and I'll talk about this. This is almost the exact same elevation, the vineyards that are used or picked to make their Côte Chalonnaise. So this is, Côte Chalonnaise is the region within Burgundy. So just like Elkton is the region within Umpqua Valley, which is the region within Southern Oregon, Côte Chalonnaise is the region within Burgundy within France. So they have their vineyards specifically in the area of Mercurey, which if that sounds familiar, it's because we are going to try a wine from Mercurey at the very end. So their vineyards are specifically in there, and they have single vineyard like bottlings of their Pinot Noir, multiple different vineyards. But when winemakers want to produce more wine, they will often declassify their wine. So they're not going to call it Mercurey, or they're not even going to call it Mercurey single vineyard wine. They are just going to declassify it to the next broader level or broader area, which is Côte Chalonnaise. So when you declassify the wine, it allows you in the old world that has all these restrictions and regulations on how the wine should be made. It allows you to break more of the rules. So some of these regions even have caps on how many bottles of wine you can produce in a given year if you're going to label as such. And the whole reason for that is they're really trying to make sure that the quality is there, that we're not focusing on quantity, we're focusing on quality. So if you have more juice and you are able to make more wine that is able to be produced under that higher label bottling, then you'll declassify and just call it Côte Chalonnaise, or maybe even Bourgogne Rouge, or just Burgundy. And it allows you to not follow the quality standards of that higher appellation. So that's what they're doing here. Really high class fruit, all estate grown from the area of Mercurey, but they're deciding not to label it as Mercurey so that they can sell it for cheaper, produce a little bit more, which means that generally speaking, you're going to be able to drink it earlier and not have to age it quite as long. So almost about the same elevation. So between like 900 and 1100 feet elevation, both of these vineyards, a little bit different in vintage, right? So the Oregon is 2014 and the Burgundian Pinot Noir is 2018. We're looking at about 35-year-old vines for the Burgundy Pinot Noir versus just about 20 to 25-year-old vines for the Brandebourg. So 10 years difference. What does that mean necessarily? Well, sometimes older vines does not mean a good thing, right? Sometimes older vines mean that the wine is not going to produce as good fruit if the vines aren't healthy. So just like humans, the older we get, the more prone we are to disease and breakdown. But if you're able to stay healthy, then you can actually produce much, much, much better wine if you're older as a vine and you're healthy. The reason is as you get older as a vine, you're producing less bunches of fruit per vine. So the flavor is a little bit more concentrated. They're just trying to focus on all of their efforts into 5 clusters instead of 20 clusters. So that's what happens as vines age. But generally also speaking, their roots are deeper because they've had the time to grow those roots deeper. And so they're a little bit more stable throughout each vintage too. Younger vines can show vintage variability a lot more easily than older vines do. But generally speaking, have a little bit more stability in terms of the flavor of the wines that they produce. So those are the 2 wines. Now let's talk about what you preferred. So let me read your tasting notes now. And if you haven't typed in your tasting notes, please do tell me. If you've got food, please taste these wines with some food, right? Pinot Noir, Pinot Noir is such a frustrating grape because it's so amazing, but it really needs food. There's a rare Pinot Noir that I really enjoy just drinking by itself. Often I find that the higher levels of acidity, the pretty rustic tannins, the intensity of the structure of the wine generally means that I'm going to enjoy that wine with food a whole lot more than just sipping on its own. So if you're struggling to really enjoy these wines right now, make sure that you think about food. And highly, highly recommend charcuterie, cheeses, anything like that, just to see how these wines will soften a little bit with some time. So, all right, so Amanda says, great. Oh, Darcy. Hi, Darcy. Great to see you. By the way, Darcy is the person who distributes all of these wonderful wines, and she and I tasted them together a couple weeks ago, which was the impetus for this class. So Darcy says, how does your impression change tasting them in reverse order? So I'm going to try tasting them again, especially now that a little bit more air has opened up these wines. And I'm gonna try the Brandberg first, the Levèche second, and then back again in reverse order. Let's see. Okay, definitely softened, right? That first time I tasted it, the acidity was so much. I'm definitely getting a little bit more of this like richer woodsy note in the back end, a little bit more of those spices that y'all were talking about, a little bit more of those tobacco notes. Still rustic, still bright and like vibrant to me. Let's see how the Levèche has changed. Way more floral now that it's come up. So it's like dark, dried floral petals, a little bit dusty, but all of these like purple, like almost Concord grape qualities to it. Very, very different than the first try. All of that iron has kind of dissipated, and it's much more feminine now than it was originally. So let me taste it again, and I'm going to go back to the Brandberg and see. Yeah, so much more of those like purple violets and black cherries are coming out. More of that velvety texture. Those tannins are like super fine grained, super refined tannins. Really gorgeous wine. I keep going back to this. This was actually, when I first did all 4 of these wines, this was not my favorite wine. I didn't enjoy it that much, and I can't get enough of it right now. So it just goes to show you how our impressions of the wine change so much on how we're tasting, the progression. Let's see. On the Brandberg, tasting in reverse order seems so much lighter, so much softer, without that like intensity, that power of structure and tannin. So I like tasting the Brandberg first, because I think that after the Levèche, the Brandberg kind of dies away, the structure in the palate. Just it seems a little bit less interesting trying it in reverse order. So if y'all tried the same thing and tried to switch up the order, please let me know what you thought about doing that. So Chris and the gang says, switching back to wine number 1 from wine number 2, wine number 1 seemed less dry and fruitier than when we tasted it earlier in the session. Yeah, it's so fascinating how these wines have changed so much. So, and I often find that like the tannins and acidity, when we first try wine, especially if it's the first one of the night, or if we're drinking something else beforehand, just kind of assault your palate. And then as your palate kind of becomes saturated with the wine, they're less aggressive for sure. So Nathan says, number 2 is acidic and tart cherry. Oh, lost it. Hold on. Sorry. Sorry. Oh, great. And sorry, going back, I lost my place in the chat room. Nathan, yes, similar to Vin de Pas in Bordeaux. So just country wine of the country. So declassifying your wine to break a little bit more rules, produce more wine, high quality, but not the quality standards of the higher end label. So, and back to your other comment. Man, I just lost it. Okay, great. Sorry. Nathan says, number 2, acidic and tart cherry cough syrup on the finish. Yeah, that medicinal cherry quality. And not in a bad way, I don't think. I generally don't like using ever the word medicinal in my wine notes, because it clues us in that we think about being sick, and cough syrup never tastes good. But I think this is like a good medicinal cherry syrup, so I like it. Tawana says, I have some references. I've seen some references, only acknowledge 3 levels of Burgundy, and some list 4. all have Bourgogne, Premier Cru, and Grand Cru, the variation between appellation and village. Great question. So Bourgogne would just be regular. So anything you see Bourgogne, it just means wine from Burgundy. Then I would say, yes, you do have the village level. So this would be Bourgogne, but it's not just Bourgogne Rouge, it's Côte Chalonnaise or Nuits Saint-Georges or Volnay. It's the specific region. I'm sorry, this would actually not be village level. So the specific villages or village within Côte Chalonnaise could be classified as village level. Then within that, you get Premier Cru and Grand Cru, and those are vineyard specific. So the vineyards themselves within Nuits Saint-Georges or within Volnay or within Chablis have to be classified as Premier Cru. So then you'll see it'll look like this. Premier Cru. It'll just say 1 ER Cru or Grand Cru. And those are classified vineyards. So these vineyards can actually be owned by multiple different producers. So say there's a vineyard and it's 8 hectares. So it's about 21.3 acres. I don't know if I did the math right on that. Within that, I might actually own only 2 or 3 rows within that vineyard. And then some mom and some pop might own 2, and this other family owns 2 rows over here, and someone else has like the vast majority. And that's just because of the inheritance laws of Burgundy. Instead of the parents dying and passing it all down to the eldest son, it got split up equally. All of their holdings got split up equally amongst their children. And so it became more and more parcelized as, you know, as the inheritance just continues to change the way the vineyards are broken up. So now it's much harder to see someone actually owning large vineyard lands unless they can buy it from all of these different, buy it back from all of these different other owners. So there are 4 levels. Most people would forget about Bourgogne and they'll just say, oh yeah, there's village or appellation. Premier Cru and Grand Cru. Grand Cru is definitely the most expensive, the most sought after, and very, very, very few vineyards within all of Burgundy or Grand Cru. I think it's less than like 4% of vineyard holdings are qualified or classified as Grand Cru. Great question there. Kelly says, how does Sonoma, Russian River Valley, compare to Elkton geographically? We're drinking Russian River Pinot Noir that our wine store said was similar to Brandebourg. So California, Russian River Valley has a lot of this like fog influence, so it's going to be a cooler climate than a lot of other California regions. It's going to be kind of the coolest among North Coast wine regions for Pinot Noir because it has the most fog influence coming from the San Francisco Bay. So that fog's going to roll in like 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon and hang out sometimes until like noon or 1 p.m. during the growing season. So similar that the elevation does to Brandebourg to elongate the growing season, the fog does to the Russian River Valley of the North Coast. So while it might be sea level, the elevation does similar things in terms of like elongating that growing season that fog does. So I generally find that California is, even though that fog happens, you have this very, very hot sun for those times in the afternoon that the fruit is just riper. So instead of like the red fruit earthiness of Oregon, you generally have much darker, fruitier, more luscious and voluptuous wines, Pinot Noir wines coming out of California. Can you tell us what Russian River Valley Pinot Noir you were tasting? I'd love to know the specifics. So hopefully that question helped you out. Oregon does have different soil types and different climate than California just does, produces quite different wines. Next class, maybe we'll do it Oregon versus California Pinot Noir. So Nathan said, oh, we already talked about that. The gang here preferred wine number 2. So a little bit more of that funk, a little bit more of that complexity. I think we can all agree that there was quite a bit more complexity of the Domaine Levesque. I love them both, but I think the Domaine Levesque just had a little bit more to sing about. See, Tawana says, both amazing, but love the complexity of number 2. Okay, great. Would drink number 1 by itself, Bob Scanlon says, but prefer food with. Okay, yes. Chris Nelson, a few more converts to the modern funk. Yes, not that I would need everyone to drink funky wine all the time, but it's fun to be able to appreciate the wines when they do have some of that funk. Amanda says, love number 2, John loved number 1. So interesting. All right, let's see. Salmon and Sampap. Do we have do we have agreement or disagreement about which is the favorite?
Disagreement.
Disagreement. Okay. Woo! What was your favorite, Salmon? Wine number 1 and Sampap wine number 2.
I started out with 1, but then I switched to 2.
Okay. So my dad usually prefers a little bit more of those funkier wines, and my mom usually prefers a little bit more of that streamlined, like linear taste. So that doesn't surprise me at all that they picked different wines. Just goes to show you, you can disagree about your wines and still stay married for 42 years. So I love it. Bob Scalen says wine number 2's favorite. So Rick Morrison labeled the VA Vin at a higher price. Yeah, so let's talk about that. VA Vin, it just means old vines. And generally speaking, there's no universal standard about what it means to have old vines. So sometimes people will label their wines old vines if they're just 25 years old. That's technically considered old vines, which is really sad, right? But in other areas that are making wine from vines that are over 150 years old, they don't actually label their wines as old vines. So it's really a marketing thing, but if you have different vineyard holdings, you might call just to differentiate all of your different labelings, because these producers sometimes, like of all their vineyards, they're producing only Pinot Noir, maybe Chardonnay too, but they're producing, 15 different labels. They're super high end, the best vineyard site. Then they have a blend of different vineyard sites, but the oldest vines that they might call VA Vin. So it's really a marketing thing. So be careful not to be fooled too much by old vines, whether that's New World labeling or Old World labeling, because there's no real standard for what that means. But generally speaking, if you're going to have multiple labelings, and one of them is going to be called VA Vin, that's going to be the oldest vines. And in France, generally, you're not going to see anything labeled as old vines unless it's over about 35, 40 years old. So a little bit, but then that's just a general assumption, not necessarily like a law or anything. So great question. And generally, yeah, they're going to be a higher price because they're producing less wines. Those older vines are. So, all right. Kelly says, number 1 has more acidic alcohol aftertaste. Okay, very bright. Yes, totally agree. Like number 2, the best. How does the winemaker, Ada says, accommodate for the change in wine due to the aging of the vines? Great question. Some of these winemakers are going to do a lot in the actual winery to help the wine express as much of its flavor and personality as possible. You often find more of that in New World wineries. In Older World wineries, especially in Burgundy, they don't consider themselves winemakers. They call themselves vignerons, which just means like vine tenders. Basically, they're farmers. They just wine happens to be the product. So very much not intervening as much in the winery, letting the vine just kind of express themselves. So in terms of accommodating for the change in the wine due to the age of the wine, they want to express that, right? They want to express, they want the wines to express what the vines are trying to express. And so they might actually ferment all of their wines the exact same way, age them the exact same way, and just let the wine express itself. So they're not doing a whole lot to necessarily accommodate or fix or steer the wine in a specific direction, as much as is more common in New World wine regions. So all of these wineries though that I feature, I don't like the term natural wine, but all of these wineries are really doing that in their own right. So yes, you're intervening because you're pruning. Like you're not just like picking grapes and throwing them in a vat and hoping they turn into wine. Like there is a process, right? They're not nothing's fully natural. But there are people who are really truly trying to let the wines express the fruit of these vineyards rather than forcing their ideas of the wine on it. So Rick says, prefer wine number 2, shows hotter weather wine, not like Santa Barbara, moving in that direction, heavier, cloying mouthfeel, a little bit heavier. Okay, cool. Mary and Chris love wine number 1. Okay, so right there with Salmon. Let's see. So in the essence of time, I'm going to go back to these comments a little bit later and see if I missed anything. Why don't we go ahead and pour the next two wines, just so I don't keep you forever and ever. And these next two wines I really want to talk a little bit more about. No video either. Y'all, I'm sorry that we're having issues with video. Hopefully we get it back on. There's no problem on my end in terms of streaming. Sometimes it'll say like my connection is low. So my connection is fine. I hope that we can get it worked out shortly. So, all right. Yes, true. They say that the wine is made in the vineyard, right? Not in the winery. So that is a very French thing to say that more and more New World winemakers are starting to emulate as well. All right. By the way, we've got 10 months in French oak. Most of it being neutral on the Domaine de l'Evêche. The Brandebourg, actually, I couldn't get any information about them. They don't make this wine from this vineyard anymore. I believe it's only about 9 months, and it's French oak, and it's neutral as well, so very, very similar. But they don't actually have this wine listed, the tech information on this wine listed anymore on their website. So, all right, so... All right, well, that's the problem with technology. It allows us to interact together, but sometimes there's just snafus. Let's go ahead and pour the Lundin Articulate. That's the black label. We're going to pour that wine, wine number 3, we'll call it. And the Domaine Pio, the Pinot Noir from Mercure, on wine number 4. And then if you've got 4 glasses, can go ahead and just top off all of your 4 glasses so that we can go back and switch up the order and try them all again in different orders and see if that helps. So, all right. Whew, okay, sorry, I skipped the site. I went right into smelling. I was so excited to smell these wines. All right, let's check out the site. We're gonna speed past the site a little bit more. I know there's a difference in some clarity of these. They're getting a little bit more cloudy, a little bit more hazy. Not as brilliantly clear, but still not super cloudy or hazy. Color, it's almost the reverse. So the last round, the wine from Burgundy was a lot more of that darker purplish ruby hue, and then we had a garnet in the wine from Oregon. Now we have a little bit opposite. We have this super pale, garnety, brickish amber color on the wine from Mercure, and we have this like really beautiful ruby with hints of purple on the wine from Oregon. Vintages on these, we've got 2016 for the Lundin from Oregon and 2017 for the wine from Mercure. Very different vine age on these, right? So we're looking at 25 to 35-year-old vines for the wine from Oregon, and 60 to 75-year-old vines for the wine from Mercure. So we're jumping up this level a little bit in terms of quality for sure. So let's get into the smell. Concentration, pretty similar. A little bit deeper concentration on both of these, right, than we had in the last one. Pretty similar in terms of the legs. By the way, the alcohol percentages of the Brandebourg was over 14%, 14.3. And we've got 12.5%, I believe, for the Domaine de l'Evêche. Lundin Articulate, we have 13.5% alcohol and 13% for the Domaine Pio. So a little bit more similar here. All right. Whoo, baby. These wines. While y'all are smelling these wines, feel free, type in the chat room anything that you're smelling, and if there's big differences between the last 2 wines that we were smelling. So some of you might know, last year I went to Oregon, and I worked harvest in Willamette Valley, Oregon, and it was quite the experience. I worked there for about a month working in the winery itself. I wasn't picking grapes. They had teams that could do that much better than I could, that literally are like picking grape clusters faster than I can just walk down the stairs. And And so I was working in the winery side, so processing the grapes as they're coming in, sorting out the bad grapes, keeping the good ones, and then once those grapes go into these big fermentation tanks, processing them there, a lot of foot stomping, literally getting into tanks that were 5 feet tall, and holding myself up on the side while I like kick my feet through the grapes to kind of stomp them and stir them all up. So wild experience. It's called pigeage. It's a French term. So in these big fermenters or fermentation tanks, the grapes go in there, sometimes whole clusters, sometimes destemmed, different conversation for a different day. And as the grapes get crushed and the juice forms, the grape skins are kind of always going to rise to the top and the juice is on the bottom. Well, you want your wines to kind of hang out for sometimes 4 to 5 days. Not wines. You want the juice to hang out on the must, it's called, for about 4 to 5 days before fermentation starts. And the reason is because the color and the tannins and a lot of the flavor of the wine comes from the skin of the grapes. You want to extract as much of that possible before the fermentation process starts. So you basically will chill down these fermentation tanks to below 40 degrees so that the fermentation doesn't start naturally, to allow for this like 4 or 5 day process of really getting the extraction from the grape skins. It is a very cold process to do that with your legs because the must that you're working on is sometimes only 37, 38 degrees, and you're just like in these tanks for like hours on end, going from one to the other. Very, very, very cold, very brutal process. But the reason why traditionally it was done in France with the human body and not these big punch down presses is because the metal plates that they use in the rest of the world for people who don't want to pay for that intense labor, these metal plates are going to break the skins of the grapes a little bit more harshly and kind of allow more green, rough, bitter tannins to get into the wine, versus if you're doing it with the human body, then it is allowing for a little bit softer crushing of the grape skin. So you get a little bit more elegance and refined qualities to the wine. So both of these French wines are made through pigeage, through the human body stirring the grapes in the must during the fermentation process, rather than manual, like with a punch down metal press or anything, or a machine. I'm not sure about these two organ producers. I have a feeling that they are not doing pigeage. It's not very common in Oregon. So that if you've ever heard the term pigeage, then that is what they are referring to. So very, very, very different style there. So this London Articulate is a blend of 3 different vineyard sites, one in Yamhill Carlton, one in Aola Amity Hills, and one in Chehalem Mountains. So within Willamette Valley, so now we're going away from Elkton or Umpqua Valley or Southern Oregon, we're going back up to the more traditional Willamette Valley in Oregon. And within that, you have lots of different sub-AVAs, or American Viticultural Areas. 3 of those regions, they have vineyard sites in all 3 of those. They make single vineyard wine. That is what this producer focuses on. Higher end expressions of single vineyard Pinot Noir that aren't blended together to really express differences of soil types. So in Yamhill Carlton, you have much more alluvial soils, rockier, all of these like marine sedimentary soils that came from the Missoula floods over a million years ago, bringing down all of these rocks and marine sedimentary alluvial soils. In Aola Amity Hills, though, you have more volcanic soils mixed with clay, specific type called Jory soils. And generally speaking, they say that Pinot Noirs coming from those soils are going to express a little bit more floral, fruitier, driven, more feminine style Pinot Noirs versus marine sedimentary, more like rustic, masculine styles. In Chehalem Mountains, you have a totally different soil type. You have laurelwood soils, it's called. And it's like all of these very, very small particles that are wind blown and kind of like layered up over a long period of time. So it allows for great drainage. So you can really only have amazing wines that are growing in there without irrigation in areas like in Oregon, where you're getting plenty of rain from September through or October through April, to allow for that like deeper waterbed to irrigate the vines throughout the drier growing season of the summer. So Lundin has decided that basically they couldn't get anyone to buy their higher end wines without something as a gateway drug into their wines. So they make this wine called Articulate. It's a blend of 3 of the different vineyard sites, aged in a little bit less oak, meant to same quality up here, but they're reducing the price to just articulate the overall expression of Willamette Valley rather than the single vineyard expressions. To me, this is probably one of the best Pinot Noirs from Oregon that I've had at this price range. So this has been on my feature list for a little while if you've had it before. Domaine Pillon. It's from Mercury, so we're not just in Burgundy. Mercury is within Côte Chalonnaise. These are 60 to 70-year-old vines on here. Calcareous, and clay soils. So we have a lot more limestone in these soils than we have in any of the regions that we've had so far. And the limestone, if you've attended the limestone soil series class, allows for that perfect drainage and water retention. So it doesn't matter if you have too much rain one year or too little rain one year. Limestone soils are like the best possible, like, of all terroir types. So that is very common, the limestone soils throughout all of Burgundy, and is said to produce some of the best wines in the entire world. I would agree. Father-son duo for this one. The Mercury spends 12 months in oak. The Lundin, again, they don't actually give me information about this particular wine. I am guessing it's about that way, but I don't think any of it is new, versus the Mercury has 30% new oak. The reason why I wanted to make sure we tasted this one last is because of all of that extra oak. It needs a little bit more time to breathe. This wine could easily age for another like 7 to 10 years, no problem, no questions asked. So to drink it right now needs a little bit more air, and definitely needs some food. So let's see what y'all are smelling and tasting in these wines. So, all right, scrolling up here. 6 people, 2 bottles. We've moved on to wine number 3. Totally fine. Plum and fresh strawberries on the nose. Love that. Love the plum call. And to me, Pinot Noir always has like hints of strawberries, but sometimes they're like super ripe and like really juicy and fruity versus like super green and kind of bitter. So definitely a lot more strawberries on this, right? Number 3, wow, ripe tart cherry with hint of caramelized brown sugar. Okay, interesting. A touch of earthiness with a hint of dried herbs like tarragon. Love the tarragon call, because more of those like sweet herbs, that tarragon. And yeah, there's like this sweetness to it with all of this savory, like almost this umami mushroomy note to it as well. Wine number 4, dried cranberries and some mushrooms. Great, with a lot of Brett Funk. So we've got, let's see here. Oh yeah, definitely like these. Man, I'm just getting smelling, and I was talking so much about these wines. Oh my word. Definitely, I think there's mushrooms on both of these wines, much more pronounced and obvious than the last 2 wines. But there's so much more fruit and this woodsiness to the Lundin Articulate, the wine number 3. And all of those mushrooms are really coming out like fresh mushrooms, like you're walking through the forest and like picking wild mushrooms. Let's see. So number 4, ripe cherry and cranberry and hay farm after cutting plus a funkiness. Yes, I love that. The this grassy note, but like without the green qualities. So hay, love that call. Oh man, I could just smell that wine for the rest of the night and not even have to taste it. That's that delicious. So different from each other, right? Hopefully all 4 of these wines have been very impressively different. We're only doing wine number 1 and number 4. Awesome. How do they taste in comparison to each other, the Brandebourg and the Mercury? I'm super curious about reversing the order and what your thoughts are doing those side by side, Denise. Chris and the gang says wine number 4 is slight funk, sweet tobacco, and cedar. So yeah, we were getting tobacco on the first couple. I definitely but I'm definitely getting like the tobacco notes on both of these. I don't think it's like smoked yet. It's still like you're packing the pipe with it. And a little bit more earthy than prunes. Okay, awesome. Some Pop says number 4 is more intense with some funk. Great. Maybe cat pee, but not bad. Interesting. So a little bit like ammonia on that one.
I was trying to figure out. I'm not sure.
He might be changing his mind, he says.
No, it's something weird.
Something weird, but not sure exactly. Okay. Interesting. Chris Nels, prune call, like it. Very earthy and dried fruit. Great. Cat pee, lol. Umami comes from all places. It is true. Yes, yes. Okay, and plum and spice, yes. What are the spices that we are getting? How are the spices different between the Lundin and the PO, the Domaine PO from Mercury? Because I'm getting spices on both of these. And are they different than the allspices and clove notes that we were getting in the first two? I think this is the first time I've actually tasted both of these. So, ooh, wow. It's so interesting trying them in this order again, just because I've had all these wines before and I've had them side by side, but trying them specifically in this order as a comparative tasting is a very different experience. So, I guess, but that's delicious. All right, that is what's being paired for my Thanksgiving dinner. By the way, if you missed the beginning part of this class, this whole thing started just because I wanted to find the Pinot Noir that I was going to serve for Thanksgiving. So we were tasting all 4 of these. I was like, I just want to try a class where all 4 of these wines are served side by side. But that Domaine PO from Mercury, that just talk about an incredible wine. What I love about it is the tannins in the Domaine PO from Mercury are there, but they're very like well integrated into the wine. I don't feel like the oak is speaking louder than the fruit of the wine. I think the oak and the fruit, the minerality, the earthiness, the floral notes, the texture, like all of these components are so well balanced together that just make for an incredible wine. Man, this makes my heart really happy. All right, so Denise says we tried number 1 and number 4. 4 was more complex and seemed to be more balanced than number 1. We liked 4 better. Yeah, those are really rough like very, very like the starkest differences between number 1 and number 4 for sure. So Tawana says, I'm smoking the turkey. Which would you pair more with a smoked flavor? So the smoke, that's a great question. So that really does make a huge difference. I would go with probably more like the Lundin Articulate. I want a little bit more of that intensity, a little bit more of that darker fruit. I don't want something as subtle as the Domaine PO because that smoky flavor is going to overpower a wine that doesn't have the same intensity of flavor. So anyone else do something different for Thanksgiving? Like, do they fry turkey? Do they do ham or duck or lamb instead? Do you have, are y'all doing Thanksgiving this year? What's going on with everybody? Doing like a Zoom event where everyone's like making their own Thanksgiving dinner. Tell me what your traditions are, how they're changing this year, and I will help you find your wine for it. So Chris Nelson says, number 4 paired with Thanksgiving meal seems like be perfect with the savory meal. Thanks, my pleasure. I love, generally speaking, turkey is a really dry meat, right? So doing a wine that's too acidic or too tannic with a drier meat, like I don't care if you fry it or if you smoke it or whatever, turkey is a very lean meat. You can't do too much other than that. But you need a wine that's going to stand up to all of the other flavors on the table. Your sausage stuffing and the gravy and the mashed potatoes and sweet potato and cranberry and all of this stuff. And I generally find like Pinot Noir is my favorite pairing for all of those different flavors. I also love Côte d'Aronnes, so Grenache and Syrah blended together. Softer, they're not going to be as mean as a 100% Syrah, but they're going to be a little bit fuller flavor for those people who want a big red. Cabernet is like a no-go with turkey. Again, if you eat what you like and drink what you like, you do you. But in terms of like finding that really great pairing that's going to accentuate both the flavor of the wine and the flavor of the food, I stay away from wines that have too much acid or too much tannins with the turkey part of the dish. So Mary and Chris, we're going to smoke a turkey for 2. Okay, great. So a smaller turkey, we're going to smoke it too. So I would also recommend a little bit of a fattier style red wine with that. You could also do a white wine. Again, avoid anything too acidic. So stay away from Sauvignon Blancs or anything like that. I love Oregon Pinot Gris, actually, or Alsatian Pinot Gris for a white wine for Thanksgiving, because they're a little bit silkier, a little bit richer, a little bit kind of sexier on the fruit without that really intense acidity. So I will have a Thanksgiving package that I will put out in different styles. You can mix and match, or just like get the 6-pack or get the higher end 4-pack. So stay tuned for that for sure. If you're not on my email list, make sure you let me know and to get on that email list so you get heads up on that. So looking forward to the Mercury for Thanksgiving. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to bring this to share with anyone else. This is just my bottle for Thanksgiving. I'm just kidding. I'm definitely going to bring this to share for everybody. Denise, smoked salmon as an alternative for a few of our family. Okay, I really like that call. Salmon and Pinot Noir is also a really classic pairing. So I would actually, because salmon is a little bit, it's got a little bit more of that fattier texture, you go for a pretty big Pinot Noir. So I'd probably stay away from either the Mercury or the Brandebourg, the 2 wines that you're trying. Either of the other 2 I think would be a really great pairing. The 2 wines that you didn't have, so that's perfect because now you have 2 wines that are unopened that you could do for the smoked salmon. So Tawana says, hosting my neighbors, and we're all stuck at this home this year, so we're coming in together. Love it. We got to come together, if not in person, like we got to come together this year of all years for sure. So Viognier for Thanksgiving. I like that call. So that's a floral white wine, definitely lower on the acid level, higher on the alcohol content and body. So that would actually be an excellent, excellent pairing. So love it. Sign me up for the Thanksgiving 6-pack. I can definitely do that. So of all 4 of these wines, we talked about Thanksgiving pairings. Are there any other dishes that you envision yourself really enjoying these wines with a specific dish? Is there something that strikes a chord with you? Roast duck is a very common pairing with Pinot Noir. I think cassoulets. This is my favorite time to drink Pinot Noir in the fall before it gets too cold into winter, but so I don't want those huge reds, but I want something that's going to warm me up a little bit more. So lobster bake, interesting. So that all depends on what else is in there. So lobster can go a few different ways. You definitely do a white wine with lobster. Chardonnay is a classic pairing, especially something a little bit richer, a little bit weightier, not necessarily like oaky, buttery California style Chardonnay, but something with a little bit more oomph to it. It all depends on what's in the lobster bake. So it comes cheeses, grains, flavor profiles. Sounds amazing, by the way. Now I'm craving lobster and duck and salmon and turkey. Yeah, not so much turkey, but everything else. All right, Salmon always ask this question. If you were going to have a glass of one of these wines, what would it be? So I'm going to ask Salmon, of all 4 wines, Salmon, which wine would you want a glass of?
Right now?
Right now.
Right
yeah.
now. Probably, let me go back to the number 1.
The first one. So Salmon,
Right.
she wants to revisit the first one, the Brandebourg from Elkton, Oregon. If after the end of the class, that's what she wants a glass of. That's awesome. Nathan says number 3 for the glass, that articulate. I know, it's just so good. Of all of the wines, number three. Okay, across the board, a lot of favorites with number 3. So I'm going back and make a wild rice and butternut squash soup bisque that I think would pair well with wine number 2 or 3. Absolutely. Especially if like there's herb seasoning, but it's not necessarily spicy or anything, would be amazing. So everyone is agreeing with Salmon to go back to okay, so wine number 1, the Brandebourg. Glad y'all loved that. I think I want a glass of that Domaine Pio, but I don't want to just drink it by itself. I have this plate of cheese and charcuterie that is sitting here staring at me that I can't wait to get into with a glass of this at the end. So, so Rick Morrison's just us this year. We may do a rack of lamb, probably a Bordeaux with that. Okay, I know you collect your Chateauneuf de Papes too, so I highly recommend if you're doing lamb, get some Chateauneuf de Pape in there. One of my favorite pairings in the whole world, especially if there's like any mint seasoning at all. I love that call. So sometimes I find like some Cabernet blends can accentuate the gaminess of lamb, and I like how Grenache softens the gaminess of lamb. But some people really like that flavor of lamb, and so go for it. So awesome. Well, just so everybody knows, I'm not doing another virtual class until December. I will probably do one in December, and it will most likely be 2 different styles of sparkling wine and 2 big, bold reds. So the 2 things that everyone wants in December. They want sparkling wine to celebrate with, and we're all celebrating the end of 2020, and they want that big, bold red to go with those heartier meals, those bigger dinners. So that will be probably like the 2nd week of December. And that will be my last virtual class of the year, and then we'll get back into doing them more regularly in January, because I feel like this time of year there's just so many obligations, so many people are like begging for our attention, so many things to do. In January we can all breathe a little bit more and focus on just drinking more wine. So thank you all so much for tuning in. Really appreciated all your comments and participation in the chat room and your tasting notes. I hope you found a Pinot Noir that you really love, and I hope that you got to know Pinot Noir a little bit better, especially Oregon versus Burgundy. So, and Julie says Mercury, yes. All right, cool. We can drink that together then. Great question here about the Corvin. It does not work with sparkling wine because the pressure unit of argon gas is going to be different than the dissolved carbon dioxide. So unfortunately, the Corvin does not work with sparkling wine. The best way to preserve the bubbles for sparkling wine, if you're going to open it and not drink the rest, is just make sure you keep it as cold as possible. You don't have to even invest in, like, don't do a silver spoon or anything like that. Literally, it is temperature that's going to preserve your wine the best for sparkling wine. So keep it as cold, like as close to like 33, 34 degrees as possible, so as cold as you can get without freezing. That is going to make, like, you can have sparkling wine opened without even one of those special tops on it, and will keep the bubbles in there for days if you keep your refrigerator that cold. So, and then the other option to just make sure that you don't lose your bubbles is just drink all the sparkling wine. So that's my solution always to sparkling wine, is just drink it and drink it faster. All right, well, thank you all so much. If you have any other questions, you all have my email address, cell phone number, Facebook, Instagram, all of the things. So thank you all. I wish you all the best, and until I see you again, drink lots of Pinot Noir. Cheers.